Sometimes the numbers scream at you. Sometimes they just whisper. I learned to listen. Late October in Denver carried a brittle chill that seeped through the windows of Westfield Strategic Partners. Inside, the atmosphere was no warmer. Performance metrics, quarterly bonuses, and billable hours loomed larger than any notion of integrity. I sat hunched at my desk, buried in the labyrinth of spreadsheets that had become my world. My colleagues moved in hushed currents around me, heads bowed, eyes narrowed, hands clutched onto their workloads as if letting go might make them targets. I had always believed if you worked hard and stayed honest, you'd be protected. That illusion was about to shatter. Westfield wasn't always like this, or maybe it had been, and I'd been too naive to see it. When I'd first arrived, wide-eyed, fresh out of grad school, I thought I'd found a place where attention to detail was prized. Brandon Miles had said as much during my interview. I need someone who doesn't miss things, he'd told me with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. I didn't realize then that noticing the wrong things would be considered a liability, not an asset. That Thursday morning, I stumbled onto the first thread. While reconciling monthly reports for one of our high-profile clients, the Harley Group, something prickled at the edge of my attention. Payment routing numbers repeated themselves across different vendors. A vendor for office supplies, another for consulting services, a third for technology solutions, all cycling through the same obscure offshore bank. It was subtle, almost elegant, the kind of pattern you could overlook if you weren't paying close enough attention. I flagged the entries in yellow, attached notes, and dug deeper. Invoice dates didn't match shipment logs. Vendor addresses either led to vacant lots or, bizarrely, cross-referenced each other. One so-called logistics company had an address that belonged to a dry cleaner in suburban Phoenix. Duplicate invoices appeared with slightly altered amounts, inflated just enough to siphon money without drawing the wrong eyes. I leaned back in my chair, my heartbeat in my throat. This wasn't clerical error. This was orchestration. At lunch, I approached Brandon's office. His glass door was half shut, his attention absorbed by whatever glittered on his laptop screen. When he noticed me lingering, he waved me in with an impatient flick of his hand. I placed the folder containing my findings on his desk. I found some inconsistencies in the Harley Group transactions, I said, trying to sound neutral, factual. His gaze barely flickered toward the folder. Inconsistencies? I opened the file, pointing to the highlighted sections. Duplicate payments routed through the same offshore bank accounts. Vendors with unverifiable addresses. It's systematic. Brandon finally closed his laptop. He flipped through the papers slowly, his face an unreadable mask. When he spoke, his voice was dry, dismissive. The Harley Group is a high-value client, Daniel. These things sometimes look worse on paper than they are. Let it go. I hesitated. But, let it go, he repeated, voice firmer, colder. Focus on your assigned tasks. The meeting ended without another word. I left his office with the folder still clutched in my hands and a gnawing unease growing in my gut. Logic wrestled with instinct, the training ingrained into me to trust processes, to respect authority, to believe the system would self-correct. But numbers don't lie, I thought. People do. The rest of the afternoon dragged in a fog. Brandon's non-reaction should have calmed me, but it only sharpened my anxiety. Something was wrong, not just with the transactions, but with the silence that greeted my discovery. By evening, as most of my colleagues packed up and hurried home, I remained at my desk, staring at the folder like it was radioactive. That's when I made my decision. I slid a USB drive into my work laptop, furtively backing up the flagged documents, the spreadsheets, and my notes. I knew it was against company policy. The words unauthorized data transfer rang in my ears like an alarm bell. Still, I couldn't ignore what my gut screamed. If I left this solely in company hands, it would vanish. And so would I. As the last file completed transfer, I tucked the USB deep into my pocket. I packed my things methodically, locking away any sign that I'd been working on anything other than mundane reports. Before I logged out, I allowed myself a moment to stare at the Westfield logo on my screensaver. How easily a symbol could become a mask for rot. Numbers had always been my safe place. Clean, orderly, truthful. Unlike people, numbers didn't lie. They didn't whisper sweet reassurances while stabbing you in the back. They didn't fire you over lunch meetings or bury your doubts under memos and HR protocols. Numbers told stories, if you knew how to listen. On the drive home, I replayed the day in my mind. Every flicker of hesitation in Brandon's eyes. Every cold shoulder from coworkers who used to greet me with nods. Denver's skyline blurred by the time I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex. When I unlocked my front door, the air inside was stale, untouched. I dumped my bag on the couch, kicked off my shoes, and powered up my personal laptop. I plugged in the USB drive, checked that every file had transferred correctly, then encrypted a copy onto an external hard drive hidden behind a false panel in my closet. Insurance, in case things got worse. Afterward, I sat back at the kitchen table, opened my company email one last time, and stared at the inbox. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, a single, terse notification popped up at the top of the screen. Your access privileges have been modified. The betrayal wasn't loud. It came with a handshake, a smile, and a termination letter. Early November in Denver meant the mornings were darker, and so, it seemed, was everything else. The Human Resources Department at Westfield Strategic Partners had always felt sterile, but today, it was almost clinical in its detachment. The walls were a muted gray, the carpet muffled every footstep, and the receptionist didn't even glance up as I entered. It was as if I had already become invisible. I remembered Trevor, the analyst who disappeared after questioning too much. I had become him. 2 HR representatives waited behind a conference table. One older, one younger, both wearing polite, unreadable expressions. A folder lay neatly in front of them, the company's logo stamped in silver on the cover like a seal of execution. "We regret to inform you," the older one began, his voice a practiced blend of sorrow and efficiency, "that due to corporate restructuring your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. No warning, no discussion. Just a decision already made, the machinery already grinding forward." I nodded stiffly, pretending I hadn't seen it coming. "There's a severance package outlined here," the younger one said, sliding the folder toward me with 2 fingers. "You'll also find instructions regarding your health benefits and final paycheck. We'd appreciate it if you could clear your desk by noon." My fingers brushed the folder but didn't open it. "Is Brandon available?" I asked, already knowing the answer. The older HR rep shook his head, his smile tightening. "He's currently unavailable. This is not personal, Mr. Cross." Of course it wasn't personal. It was just betrayal dressed in corporate language. Without another word, I stood, folder in hand, and walked out of the HR office. My footsteps echoed down the corridor, but nobody turned to look. Not the receptionists tapping at their keyboards. Not the other employees bustling past, pretending not to notice the dead man walking among them. Before I reached my cubicle, I veered into the server room, a restricted area I still had temporary access to, at least for a few more minutes. My hands moved quickly, mechanically. Inserted the emergency USB into the terminal. Launched the hidden backdoor script I had prepared 2 nights ago. The data would route itself securely to Rachel Monroe, the lawyer I had contacted as a just-in-case measure. Insurance, proof, survival. The script finished in less than 30 seconds. No alarms, no blinking lights. Just a quiet confirmation window flashing green before disappearing. I slid the USB back into my pocket and kept walking. Past my desk, past the stares of a few colleagues who barely masked their curiosity. My computer was still on, a final email notification blinking faintly. I didn't bother checking it. There was nothing left for me here. As I passed through the security checkpoint toward the main lobby, my phone vibrated once in my pocket. I glanced down discreetly. A message from an unknown number. "Be careful. They're watching everyone." No signature, but I knew it was Sophia. There was no one else who would send something like that. I pocketed the phone and pushed through the revolving doors into the cold Denver air. My breath curled in white clouds. I forced my face into a mask of calm, even as my heart pounded. Out here, Appearances mattered. Inside, I was a live wire ready to snap. I walked across the lot to my car, keys already in hand. The asphalt stretched out under the pale sun, empty except for a few scattered vehicles. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe it was over, that I had slipped through unnoticed, that the worst of it was behind me. Then I saw the SUV. It was parked 3 rows down, black and nondescript, windows tinted almost to opacity. It hadn't been there when I arrived that morning, I was sure of it. I slid into my car and started the engine without looking directly at the SUV. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, someone shifting in the driver's seat, watching. I pulled out slowly, merging onto the exit road. The SUV stayed where it was for a beat too long, then pulled out behind me. Not close enough to be obvious, but not far enough to be innocent. I kept my expression neutral, my hands steady on the wheel, while my mind raced. They weren't just letting me go quietly. They were watching, waiting. Maybe for me to panic. Maybe for me to slip up. I took a winding route home, doubling back through side streets and neighborhoods. The SUV followed, always 2 or 3 car lengths behind, never attempting to overtake. It was a ghost pinned to my rearview mirror. By the time I finally pulled into the underground parking garage of my apartment complex, my pulse was a steady drumbeat in my ears. I didn't drive to my usual spot. Instead, I looped through to another level, cutting the lights before I coasted into a hidden corner. I watched in the shadows as the SUV cruised past, slowly, then disappeared around a bend. Once I was sure they were gone, I hurried up to my apartment, bolting the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I powered up my personal laptop. I dug out the second USB, the one containing the kill switch protocol, and plugged it into the port. On the desktop, a single window popped up. Activate dead man's switch? If I disappeared for 48 hours, if I didn't manually check in, every encrypted file would automatically be released to Rachel, to Sophia, to the media, to federal investigators. Irrevocable. Unstoppable. I clicked yes. There was no way back, only forward. I wasn't the only one who had seen the rot underneath Westfield's polished surface. The coffee shop was a small, cracked jewel tucked off a county road outside Denver, its once bright sign sun-faded and sagging. Inside, the air smelled faintly of burned coffee and cleaning fluid. Only 2 other patrons occupied booths near the back, neither of them looking particularly interested in caffeine. I chose a table near the front window, where I could watch the parking lot, and have at least one exit within reach. Sophia once told me, "If you find something rotten, don't dig alone." She arrived 5 minutes late, wearing a gray coat and a scarf pulled up almost to her eyes. She ordered nothing, just slid into the seat across from me, her movements sharp, deliberate. No greetings, no wasted words. Only tension so thick it seemed to warp the air between us. "I'm glad you came," I said, keeping my voice low. "You shouldn't have contacted me through work channels," she replied. "It's not safe." I leaned in. "If I don't have help, this dies with me. You know that." Sophia scanned the room with a glance that looked casual, but wasn't. Her gaze paused briefly on the waiter wiping down tables. A little too interested in us, a little too slow with the rag in his hand. Pressure built around us, invisible but undeniable. 3 days ago, she said, slipping a folded piece of paper from her coat. "I got this." I unfolded it under the table. A printed email, anonymous, terse. "Walk away while you still can." No signature, no return address. Just enough to make your skin crawl. "Why tell me?" I asked. Sophia's mouth tightened. "Because you're right. If it's just you, they'll bury it. And you. They already tried with Trevor. They almost succeeded with me." I kept my face blank, but something inside me twisted. So it wasn't just me losing sleep, seeing shadows where there might be none. Sophia reached into her bag and slid a slim metallic USB drive across the table, her hand barely moving. I caught it in my palm as if she'd handed me a deadly weapon, which, in a sense, she had. "I've been collecting documentation for months," she murmured. "Patterns across multiple client portfolios, shell companies, offshore accounts. Harley Group is just the tip." I felt the weight of the drive as if it were a stone dragging me under. Why didn't you go to the authorities? I didn't know who I could trust, she said simply. Now I have someone. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the ancient coffee machine filling the space between us. The waiter drifted closer, rag still in hand, eyes flicking between us. I resisted the urge to bolt for the door. I have a contact, Sophia said under her breath. Michelle Carter, FBI. She specializes in financial crimes. She's not part of the system Westfield owns. When? I asked. Tonight, if you're ready. I was more than ready. I was drowning, and she had just thrown me a lifeline. We stood simultaneously, each moving casually but with purpose. Outside, the gray afternoon had dipped toward evening. The parking lot stretched empty except for a few scattered vehicles. I didn't notice the black SUV until I reached my car. It was parked 2 rows over, angled differently than earlier, and the license plate was different. Not just a digit off. Completely different. A cold weight settled in my gut. They weren't just watching. They were adapting. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and watched the SUV through my rearview mirror. No movement, no headlights. Just presence, heavy, patient. The USB drive burned against my palm as if it had a pulse of its own. I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies. But I also realized, for the first time, truly realized, that I was in far deeper than I had imagined. If they thought firing me was enough to silence me, they underestimated just how stubborn I could be. The FBI office in Denver wasn't what television made it out to be. No marble floors, no shiny plaques, no agents walking around with sunglasses indoors. Just a nondescript government building that looked more like a tax office than the headquarters of a federal investigation. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, taking a long, circuitous route, checking over my shoulder more than once. Rachel, my lawyer, once warned me. When powerful men feel cornered, they don't just fight, they destroy. Agent Michelle Carter met me at the security checkpoint, a woman in her 40s with a weary sharpness that spoke of too many late nights and not enough victories. She wore no badge on her hip, no weapon in sight. But there was a weight to her presence that made me immediately understand why Sophia trusted her. We sat in a cramped conference room, blinds drawn, door locked from the inside. Sophia joined us a few minutes later, looking over her shoulder as if expecting to find a tale that somehow escaped the Bureau's notice. "We need them to think you're desperate," Agent Carter said, spreading out a simple diagram of the abandoned warehouse where the meeting would take place. "Scared enough to sell your soul for safety." I nodded. "How do you want to set it up?" "You reach out to Brandon," Sophia said. "Leak the idea that you're scared, that you have files you shouldn't have, and you're willing to deal." Agent Carter pointed to specific marks on the warehouse layout. "We'll have audio and visual recording from 4 angles. Microphones in the ceiling, infrared cameras. Once he incriminates himself, we move in." "And if he doesn't bite?" I asked. Sophia shrugged. "Then we escalate. But he will. Men like him always think they're the smartest person in the room." That night, back at my apartment, I drafted a careful message. It was a blend of apology and desperation, hinting that I'd stumbled into something bigger than I could handle and needed it to go away. Sophia, using a burner account she'd established weeks ago, leaked whispers into internal channels. Daniel Cross was spiraling, scared, vulnerable. By the following evening, I had my answer. A text appeared from a number I didn't recognize. "Let's meet. Warehouse on Fulton and 9th, midnight. Come alone." I read it 3 times, feeling a strange detachment. There it was. The bait had been taken. Brandon believed he could corral me back into silence, or bury me if I refused. Sophia and Agent Carter met me 2 hours before the scheduled meeting. In the back seat of an unmarked van, Carter handed me a slim recording device disguised as a key fob. "Clip it to your belt," she instructed. "We'll have agents nearby, but until you hear green light in your earpiece, you play along. Do not antagonize him. Do not get cocky." Sophia adjusted a small earpiece in my left ear, her hands steady even as her eyes betrayed a tremor of worry. "We're with you," she said quietly. I nodded, the gravity of what we were doing pressing down on my shoulders like wet concrete. There was no turning back, no safety net if things went sideways. The warehouse loomed in the distance as we pulled up. Abandoned for years, its windows shattered, rust staining the concrete like bloodstains. The perfect place for secrets to be exchanged, or buried. I exited the van and walked toward the side entrance, boots crunching on broken glass. The air was sharp with the scent of rain and decay. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of shadows and echoing footsteps. I moved to the center of the open space and waited. Minutes dragged. Then from the far end, a figure emerged. Brandon Miles, flanked by two men who didn't bother pretending they weren't muscle. He looked different outside of the office environment. Less polished, more predatory. "You made the right call," Brandon said, voice carrying easily in the hollow space. "You and we can fix this." Quietly. I kept my posture loose, submissive. "I don't want trouble," I said, letting a slight quiver creep into my voice. "I just want out." Brandon smiled. The same tight, humorless smile he wore the day he hired me. "Then let's talk about what it'll take for you to forget everything you think you know." My earpiece crackled softly. Not the green light yet. I swallowed, nodding like a man too scared to speak. Brandon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You made copies, didn't you? Smart boy. Insurance policy. But insurance only works when the company's still around to pay the claim." His meaning was clear. If I disappeared, the problem would solve itself. I was about to answer when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A vibration so soft no one else noticed. I pulled it out, heart hammering against my ribs. One new message. "Not everyone wants you alive by the end of this meeting." There's a strange calm that comes over you when you realize you have nothing left to lose. The abandoned warehouse loomed larger in the darkness, its rusted walls and broken windows cutting sharp outlines against the weak November moon. The air was biting cold, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat as I breathed in slow, measured gulps. Gravel crunched beneath my boots with every step toward the meeting point. I thought back to the first time Brandon smiled at me. The smile of a man who thought he owned everything he touched. Now, he thought he owned this moment too. Thought he owned me. Brandon waited near a stack of crumbling pallets, two bodyguards stationed loosely at his sides. His hands were jammed into the pockets of his expensive overcoat, but the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed him. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to win. I approached slowly, keeping my posture defensive, hunched, like a man about to beg for scraps. My fingers brushed the key fob clipped to my belt. The recording device humming silently. The earpiece in my left ear buzzed faintly, a presence rather than a sound, reminding me that the FBI was out there, waiting. "You're late," Brandon said, voice low but edged with impatience. "I had to be sure I wasn't being followed," I mumbled, keeping my eyes down. "Smart." He nodded approvingly, like a teacher indulging a slow student. "So you have something for me?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a flash drive, a decoy, loaded with sanitized files that looked convincing but contained nothing that could harm anyone but me if used incorrectly. I held it out in my palm, trembling slightly for effect. Brandon stepped forward, taking the drive with exaggerated casualness. He weighed it in his hand like it was nothing more than a curiosity. "You see," he said, tucking the drive into his pocket, "this could have been easy. You could have kept your head down. Trusted the people who gave you a seat at the table." His voice darkened. "Instead, you made yourself a liability." I swallowed, eyes darting toward the bodyguards. One cracked his knuckles audibly. The other shifted his weight from foot to foot, restless. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," I said, injecting enough fear into my voice to make it convincing. "I just want out, that's all." Brandon smiled. That same condescending, razor-edged smile. "There's no getting out." Not really. The earpiece remained silent. No green light. Not yet. "You think you're smart," Brandon continued, stepping closer until he loomed just a few feet away. "But you don't even know who you're playing with. Harley Group, Westfield, they're just the surface. Underneath, There are bigger names, bigger interests, names that don't appear on any paperwork. I held my breath, hoping, willing him to say more. And you, he sneered, voice dripping with contempt. You're just a loose end we forgot to cut. The nearest bodyguard moved, shifting into a ready stance. I tensed, every muscle primed to dodge or run, but then finally, the earpiece crackled. Green light, Agent Carter's voice murmured. Before the bodyguard could reach me, the warehouse erupted in noise and chaos. Floodlights blasted the darkness into harsh white. FBI agents poured in from every entrance, weapons drawn but lowered for now, barking orders. The bodyguards froze, hands halfway to concealed weapons under their jackets. Brandon turned, confusion flashing across his face for one raw instant before it hardened into a mask of anger. "Hands where we can see them!" one agent shouted. Brandon didn't resist as two agents slammed him against a wall and snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. He didn't shout, didn't argue. He just turned his head slowly to find me standing several feet away, heart still hammering in my chest. Our eyes locked. "You'll regret this," he said, voice a low, venomous promise. "You don't know how deep this goes." They hauled him away, but his words lingered like smoke in the cold air. I exhaled shakily, adrenaline burning through me in wild, uneven waves. It was over. For now. I wasn't naive enough to think it was finished. Agent Carter approached, pulling off her tactical headset and tucking it into her jacket. She leaned in close enough that only I could hear her. "This is bigger than Westfield. We just opened Pandora's box. Justice is never clean. It drips with the blood of what you had to sacrifice along the way." The Denver federal courthouse stood grim and gray against the December sky, a slab of stone and steel that seemed to hum with judgment. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with muted voices, shuffling papers, and the occasional cough that echoed off marble floors. I sat stiffly in the witness box, my palms flat against my thighs to keep them from trembling. Grandma once told me, "Doing the right thing doesn't mean you get to walk away unharmed." The trial moved like a machine, grinding, inevitable, heavy with the weight of evidence that couldn't be brushed aside. The prosecution walked the jury through mountains of records, fraudulent invoices, shell company bank statements, internal emails where executives at Westfield joked about creative accounting. I spoke when called, voice steady even as Brandon Miles stared daggers at me from the defense table. I recounted the discrepancies, the warnings, the thinly veiled threats. I handed over the digital files Sophia and I had painstakingly collected. I listened as other witnesses, former colleagues who had found courage in the aftermath, backed up the pattern of deception and retaliation. When the verdicts came, the courtroom was so silent that I could hear the bailiff's shoes squeak against the polished floor. Henry Lockhart, 10 years, federal prison. Brandon Miles, 6 years. Others, suspended sentences, plea deals, lifetime bans from the financial sector. They didn't make a scene. No outbursts, no last-minute denials, just blank faces, as if they'd already detached from the lives they'd so carefully constructed. When the gavel fell for the final time, I stood, almost unsure of what to do with my body. Sophia touched my arm lightly as she passed by, a silent confirmation. It's over. For now. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp with the bite of coming snow. Rachel Monroe found me leaning against a stone railing, hands stuffed into the pockets of my coat. "You did good," she said, offering a rare, almost smile. "Feels hollow," I admitted. Rachel nodded. "That's the thing about justice. It's never clean. But it's still worth it." Later that week, a letter arrived from the Securities and Exchange Commission, coldly formal but carrying life-altering news. Because of the information I provided, leading directly to successful enforcement action, I was entitled to a whistleblower reward. Enough money to pay off debts, to build a new life, to breathe. Sophia called to tell me she had accepted a position as head of compliance at a new financial firm, one founded by people who had watched Westfield's collapse with horror and resolve. She sounded lighter, freer, as if some invisible chain had been cut. As for me, I accepted an offer from a fintech startup downtown, a company that made ethics part of its founding principles, not just a line in a dusty employee handbook. They didn't want someone who could play office politics. They wanted someone who could smell rot before it spread. My first day there, as I set up my desk in the sunlit corner of a small, humming office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. That night, after a quiet dinner and a walk through the nearby park, I returned home, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. The familiar startup chime echoed softly through the room. One new email. No subject line, no sender listed, just a blank message body, save for a single sentence at the center of the screen. We may have lost this battle, but the war isn't over. Justice was served not in a blaze of glory, but in the quiet, relentless exposure of every lie that once hid in plain sight. The price was heavy, trust broken, safety sacrificed, yet the victory carved a permanent scar into the fortress of corruption. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. Sometimes, all it takes is one voice refusing to be silenced to turn the tide against an empire built on deceit.